expound on that?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's interesting to note that I talked about this last time when I was here because I've been talking about these issues for a long time. I've been talking about the problems in the Middle East and specifically about Iran. And now everyone in America is sort of waking up to the idea that Iran may be on the verge of getting a nuclear weapon, and the entire dynamic of the Middle East and potentially the dynamic of the world could change. And there have been some of us who have been warning the world and warning Americans about this for a long time, and at least at one point the people of Pennsylvania didn't want to hear it. They decided they didn't want someone who was out there talking about getting involved in another country in the Middle East. That we were involved in Iraq, we were involved in Afghanistan, and the fact that I was out there talking that there's another threat on the horizon, people weren't anxious to hear that. And so the election didn't go so well for me. That's one of the reasons, not the only reason, but it was certainly one of the reasons we didn't do as well in 2006 as we had hoped. But my feeling was back then, as it is now, that I have an obligation to lay out what I see and why I see it, and if it's a threat to our country. And I believe that Iran is a game changer for the world if they get a nuclear weapon. And the reason for that is that Iran, unlike other nuclear powers today, is run by a theocratic government where having a nuclear weapon in the past with the governments that we've been antagonistic toward, like the Soviet Union at one time, and China, and North Korea, the prospect of mutual assured destruction, that you may remember that from the Cold War days, which is you drop a bomb on us, you try to destroy us, we can destroy you, and so there's no reason to do this, right? Mutual assured destruction was a method to deter. It was a deterrent effect. In the case of Iran, it's an inducement, not a deterrent. If you think about the Iranian government, President Ahmadinejad goes around and talks about the principal virtue that they stress in the Islamic Republic Islamic Revolutionary Republic of Iran, is I think the way they call themselves. The principal virtue is, anybody know what it is? That's what he says all the time. Martyrdom. So the principal virtue of your country is dying for your country. So mutual assured destruction is not a deterrent. It's an inducement. Do you want to give a country who people believe that if you die for your country, you're guaranteed going to heaven, who see life as, quote, misery in the world, do you want them to have a nuclear weapon? And there's a reason that the folks on the left and the right were against Iran getting a nuclear weapon. It's because they understood that Iran was fundamentally different than any other country to date who's gotten a nuclear weapon. And so the idea that we can contain Iran, the President's policies still are, he's against Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. He's just not doing anything to stop it. I would do things to stop it. I laid this out yesterday. I put a detailed plan in place. You can see it on my website, ricksantorum.com. You can also contribute. But I laid out a detailed plan. I said, as I did when I was in the United States Senate, when I passed a bill called the Iran Freedom Support Act, which I was the author of, that was opposed by President Bush, by the way, opposed by Joe Biden, opposed by Barack Obama. They voted against it, and then 4 months later it passed unanimously when it became clear that Iran was doing all the things I said it was doing for years, and no one believed it. And it did pass unanimously. And we put sanctions on Iran, so we need to put increased sanctions on Iran. The increased sanctions have to be, and they're oil, to sanction the selling of oil outside of Iran. We do know that there will be certain countries, one country in particular, that will not abide by that sanction. But as long as everybody else does, and that one country is China, as long as everybody else does, then we can count on the Chinese to do what the Chinese do best, which is if they're a captive market, they're going to negotiate a much cheaper price for that oil if that's the only place that Iran can sell it. Right? They have no place else to sell it. They're not going to pay world price for it. They're going to pay a lot less, which is going to cost Iran billions. So those sanctions, even though they won't be complete, they will hurt Iran. And Iran's, at least I think the number was, Iran's GDP is like 70% dependent on the energy. So you can really hurt that country by doing that. President Obama has refused to do that. He's refused to put that in place. So that's number one. You'll hurt him. Number two, you need to help those in Iran who want to overthrow the government. That was part of the bill that I helped pass in 2006. President Bush never funded it to help groups in Iran, and President Obama cut most of it and, again, didn't spend any money in Iran. We need to be able to provide, for example, strike funds. There's strikes going on in Iran all the time. But they don't last long because, people run out of money and they have to go back to work. Well, what if we got the money so they could keep the strikes on longer? Shut down the economy. Shut down the transit system. Cause civil unrest. This is what we need to do. We need to have that government thrown out. We need to have the mullahs out of power. And the only way we're going to do that is by having the Green Revolution, or some form of it, which happened 2 years ago, reconstitute itself and have some success, and we should be encouraging that. 3, we should use covert activity. You may have noticed that there were computer viruses, now 2 that have been reported by the Iranians that have attacked their infrastructure, their cyber infrastructure in Iran at the nuclear facility. One of them is clearly, the first one was clearly Israeli. You could tell that for some reason they said it was marking that it came from Israel. This one is a sort of an offshoot of that. So I assume these are coming from Israel. There's also been several nuclear scientists who are involved in the nuclear program in Iran who've turned up with mysterious accidental deaths. I made it very, very clear in the policy I put out there that if you are a nuclear scientist working on the nuclear program in Iran, you are an enemy combatant of the United States, and you can be killed, period. Just like any other enemy combatant. You can be killed by, as we kill Al-Qaeda, as we kill Taliban. They would be put in the same category. We need to let them know that it's not safe to cooperate in developing nuclear weapons for people who use it. So that's 3 or 4, I can't remember. And then last, we should be working with the Israeli military right now in preparing a strike package to do what the Israelis did in Syria and Iraq, which is take out the nuclear capability through airstrikes. We should make it very clear to Iran that we are doing that, and that if they do not open up those facilities, stop what they're doing there, and open up to inspectors to make sure that they are stopped, they will be taken out. And people say, well, you might start a war if you attack those facilities. You will start a war if you don't attack those facilities.
Can we get Soviet support on that?
The Russians won't support us. Chinese won't support us. But the Saudis won't support us. The Turks won't support us. But at least in the last 2, and I suspect maybe in all 4, they will publicly complain, etc., and they will quietly say, thank you for doing it. Because it is not in the interest of the Russians to have a nuclear Iran. Remember, Russia has their own Muslim problem. Right? They have their own Muslim extremists within Russia, or within countries abutting Russia. And the principal agents of Iran are Hezbollah and Syria. They also fund Hamas, which is not a Shiite organization, it's a Sunni organization. But they are purveyors of terrorism. And now you have this nuclear capability. The last thing the Russians want is a nuke ending up in some terrorist organization that may be in Russia. And you can make the argument it's more likely to end up in Russia than it ends up here, because it's going to be easier to get that nuclear weapon out of Iran into Russia than it will be to get it into the United States. So while they may, I'm sure, complain, and I just cannot imagine that ultimately this is a bad thing for the Russians, from the standpoint of their security. So on that cheery note,
Switching gears.
How about switch gears a bit on the budget battle that's going on